Me.
Hey, Josh, I'm really excited to be talking with you. You've been doing some great work at Randstad for a number of years, and I love the way that you positioned yourself with data and analytics, because not only have you been in this field, but you've done a lot of things around the talent domain. So with that, please introduce yourself and a little bit about what we'll be talking about today.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, so I've spent the last 16 years at Randstad, which is the #1 talent company in the world. And currently I'm the Senior Vice President of Growth and Strategy. And previous to this role, which I just assumed earlier this year, I led our enterprise solutions team based in North America, which really looked at workforce planning and strategies for the Fortune 1000 and how they can best access talent and help them be successful with what they need to do every day.
Well, I mean, I want to learn from you because obviously, given your prominence in the marketplace and the fact that you all have so much data, then invites the question, how do you use it and for what purpose? And, how do you address all the privacy and how do you make sure that, appropriate action is being taken? So, with that, you want to jump in and share more about what you all are doing there at Randstad?
Yeah, let's talk about it. I definitely want to make sure that I make the call out that I would say I am tremendously curious, but definitely a deliberate amateur, as I was telling you before we jumped on, in terms of where we're at in this space and really always trying to learn from others. So happy to share and kind of talk about some of the learnings that we have, but a lot more to go into the future with what we're doing already. So I think the best way to frame up what we've done and what we're doing is really enabling this tech and touch strategy, where we don't want data and technology to be the ultimate driver of decisions. We want to enable better decisions, both from a hiring decision standpoint of an individual manager or leader, and also better career decisions for talent so they can guide themselves into the most fulfilling careers and roles that they want to assume. So how we do that is really obviously having a framework and a strategy that can help us contextualize the data and all the different systems that we use, but also breaking that down into what we have in-house, what's available to us based on everything that's in our own possession, but then also mirroring that with what's available in the public space in terms of data for talent and the markets, and using both of those to really tell us as much of a complete story as we can find. And then at the end of the day, we need to take that into a discussion with an individual and maybe sometimes a team to really make sure that we fill in all the gaps and we don't make too many assumptions just based off of information alone.
Yes, I'm loving this already. But please continue, because I'm before I start peppering you with questions, I'm very excited about how you're setting the stage here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of discussions out there around, we have a data lake and we're able to combine all this different information together. And I think that what we found is it seems much more like an ocean, and data lakes and unique views of data is absolutely important. And so I would say that we've been on a journey for almost a decade now to really try to put together different streams of data and have it be more insightful. I think the biggest thing that I've been told by every leader that I've ever talked to is, I don't need another spreadsheet. What I need is insight. What I need is context that helps me understand the information that's out there. Otherwise, it all looks like just numbers on a page. So the way we think about that is really kind of organizing ourselves into what we know we can look backwards on in a rear view mirror. So, what happened in the past? How does that, potentially guide what we're going to be doing into the future? Are the things that we're seeing best in class? Do we have benchmarks for whether it's quality and care or time for fulfillment or retention? And then really making sure that even inside of Randstad, I mean, we're 9 different organizations just in the US. And so when you think about tailoring that for a company and a person, even inside of a large organization like ours, that still means that it's not one size fits all for the entire company, but really what's the purpose fit for that individual team, that individual group, and then using all of that, if you get to the point where you feel like you've got a handle and you've really tailored that, to start to think about how you might do some predictive workforce planning. But I think that that's a pinnacle that a lot of people talk about, and that word predictive is such a buzzword that it seems like there's more out there than there really is, and it's a process to get to that point. And I feel like we're just starting to get to the bleeding edges of some of that work, but certainly have not mastered it and have no crystal ball that we can offer to anybody at this point.
So just for a point of clarity for our viewers and listeners, a workforce planning that you're talking about, are you talking about workforce planning within Randstad itself? Or are you talking about a service that would be provided to your clients?
I think we have to be bold enough to, eat our own dog food, if you will. And so some of the things I'll talk about in like the in-house data section and how we look at that is a lot based off of what we've done for ourselves, but we also want to bring that then to our clients' environments in the same process. So it's their personality, their organizational culture, it's their systems that we have to adapt the process to, the framework to. But we certainly want to use our lessons learned and how we're doing that for our teams to guide them through that process. Because I feel like over the last 10 years, we've certainly failed forward a bunch. And we want to be able to use that in the way that we talk to our clients. So it's definitely both, but it has started with what we've done for Randstad and now bringing that to our client organizations.
Yeah, I love it. And thank you for sharing and creating that clarity. And before we leave this page, you mentioned workforce planning. I see integrated talent advisory and focusing on that word integrated, because the way work can get done and how we assess and determine priorities at scale over time, so what is workforce planning to you?
Yeah. I think if you start with what's the work that has to get done, that's the first question that you really have to be able to answer. Because if you start talking about roles and teams, then I think you're starting with too much of a pigeonholed like end state in mind. So if you think about, okay, we have to get X amount of work done, and it could be for some of our pharma clients, clinical trials or regulatory filings. For some of our technology companies, it could be advancing some of their software engineering aspirations. And so the way that we think about that is, this is the work that needs to get done. Now there's a number of different levers and channels we can pull on. And we like to break it down in terms of rent, borrow, buy, build. And so you can go out and rent somebody as a doer that's going to, basically do task-based work. And that's really important because you need to get that done. You can borrow that talent in terms of consulting and strategic expertise. And somebody's going to come in and kind of share with you, how to get it done. And then you can take it from there. You can build your own organization, which is, learning and development, upskilling, helping that talent that you brought in rise. Or you can buy it and you can simply say, hey, I'm going to go out and acquire this resource with these skills and they're going to work for me and do that work on our behalf. But all those channels, all at the same time, is what we mean by workforce planning.
Well, I so celebrate what you just shared. And I know we're going to talk about, what you're doing in-house there in a second. But before we leave this, I want to amplify what you shared around understanding the work first. And then it invites the question, from your perspective, how good are we in organizations in general identifying the work, setting the basis to understand how the work can get done, downstream?
Oh, I think that's such a personal question for any in particular organization. I think there's organizations that are out there that are great at it. I think there are organizations that are really not even starting to think in that form and fashion. And so, they will unfortunately, play a bit of catch up over the next 5 to 10 years. I think if I just answered it for Randstad, I think we're, probably at that midpoint. We're on our way, and we're very serious about it. But we're the largest talent company in the world, and it's a big ship to move. And so we want to be consistent and really good at what we do in this space. But I wouldn't say that, I would hold us up as an example of where we're leading the pack, and we're consistently bringing more and more to our customers to help them be better, and hopefully learning from some of our initiatives and mistakes that we've made.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And it's your case. I echo what you just shared. There's high variability in how well this work is getting done. And also, to your point, some don't even realize that it can or should be a priority and they're kind of still thinking in the form of jobs. And, there is a cost to that given the ways work can get done today. And that all starts with understanding your internal workforce. So I know you want to talk about what you're doing in-house there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to maybe comment one last thing about how we're, grading ourselves and how companies are starting to think about that differently. I mean, just, a little over a month ago, we announced a complete reorganization of our leadership team globally. And it was less about, countries and regions and the traditional hierarchy of a company, but around the work that has to get done. We have a chief talent officer now. We have a data integration team, and that all has now become a larger executive leadership team. But what you're not going to see is, folks that just run countries and then they roll up to regional leaders and then they run, into our executive board, because we realized that was getting in the way of the progress that we wanted to make. And so I think some of the hard work is breaking some of those very traditional norms inside of any organization, those sacred cows that are very difficult to change or touch. So we're excited that, we're seeing some of that. And I think we're going to see a lot more in the market. But
I'm so happy you said that, because even before the pandemic, there's this huge appetite. And I know McKinsey wrote about it, Willis Towers Watson, and the need for new management models. And that's what I hear that you all have done, is think appropriately given the reality that you're dealing with, both in the marketplace as well as internally. So just want to celebrate that. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's in-house? I think this is the easiest place to start. If you think about that framework, you're looking at, what are the trends and historical data points that you have available to you. And so you have to look at, all those systems and data points that you have already. And we have started an innovation fund inside of our organization that's about a decade old now. Maybe it's closer to 8 years at this point. But we said, I think a little bit out of interest and opportunity, but also maybe a little bit out of fear at the time, what's going to come and disrupt our industry so rapidly and aggressively that we might be displaced in the process. And so we wanted to go out into the market and find those HR tech companies that were leading the way and make investments and learn from them as they were evolving. So Crunchr was one of the first investments that we made. And I know that this writing is a little light here, so I apologize. But basically it says, we provide HR and business leaders with key people insights for better data-driven decision-making. A lot of what we already talked about in terms of the way that we want to approach this work. But really what that means is all the systems that you have running talent operations, whether that's your ATS, your CRM, your onboarding, your learning and development programs, your survey tools, they all operate in very disparate, siloed type of frameworks. And so it's really hard to get a complete view of what your talent environment looks like. At the same time, you probably have a large amount of vendors or partners that might be providing consultancy, strategic advisory, independent contractor work, or traditional temporary staffing work. And so even if you were just looking at all your internal systems and your full-time employees, you're still missing a very large part of the picture in terms of your workforce planning. And so what Crunchr allows you to do is bring all that together, clean the data so the taxonomy is very similar and comparable, and you're not comparing, in your full-time work, you call this an analyst 3, and in your temporary world, you call that an analyst 7. That can create a lot of, bad decision making just based on the fact that the data is not good. And so Crunchr allows you to clean all that up, compare it apples to apples, but then also start to gain key insights around what are those trends and where do we see the opportunities to create really meaningful interventions, nudges, if you will, to the actual business leaders. And I think this is one thing that, really needs to be honed in on, which is the complexity of work and talent. And, certainly the pandemic didn't help, has elevated the role of the CHRO and the head of talent in many organizations, rightfully so. But that can't be the silver bullet. That's an impossible job if one person is responsible for the talent strategy in a company. Every functional leader should feel like they are a part of the talent organization, whether it's enabling growth, acquiring new talent, identifying where the gaps are. And the talent and HR organization should be there to provide the framework and structure for those people to move faster and more effectively down the path of the strategy that works for them. But I think it's a really, shared responsibility that oftentimes is obfuscated to like one group or one leader. And it's like, well, that team's going to solve all our problems. And that's just not the case. So again, Crunchr creates, I think, a common language and insight channel for all those teams to work together pretty seamlessly.
So let me ask this. Thank you for sharing. And the way you've packaged that was beautiful. I wanted to bottle that up and share it wide. Who is the consumer? When you say it's not just one person's job, for me, that then conjures up the notion of a governance body that's multidisciplined, that might include IT and operations and facilities and others. So how does it work for you? Who's consuming this data and formulating that talent strategy?
Yeah. So I think I was asking myself a question yesterday with a team at our corporate headquarters here in Atlanta. And, the question was, is hiring and talent processes too formal? And what I mean by that is, as soon as you start to, create workflows and this person's responsible for that and that team's responsible for this, I think there's some very specific things like system administration and, who's going to be actually enabling some of the tools and communications. But at the same time, if I think about some of the best experiences that our talent and employees have had, it's a much more shared experience. It's almost social, if you will. And so everybody is very clear on what the mission or kind of goal is. And then what we want to enable people to think about is, what's the simplest way for you to get that result? And what Crunchr and other tools can provide is, again, that consistent nudge of information around, this person is looking a little bit disengaged. Here's some things that we can do. This team is, suffering from, leader overload because their band has gotten too wide based on, what we found to be the most successful. Here's a couple of things you can do. And then taking those insights as a leader and actually acting upon them versus right now, again, you get a spreadsheet and here's how many people I have and, here's how long they've been here for, but it's not really telling me anything that I can go do something with. There's no tool in my hand at this point to go take action with.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And one of the things that's popping for me, and you might get to this in the next slide, is how much from either an individual leader perspective or from that team governance body perspective is hypothesis testing the means in which the approach that's taken? In other words, hey, we think the world looks like this, therefore we're going to pressure test, is the reality reflect our hypotheses? Or is it that, hey, we have a bunch of data out there, what's the stories, what are the stories that are emerging, and we want a subject matter expert to effectively tell us what's happening and potentially even formulate some recommendations. There could even be an and in there, but from your perspective, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think that there's no exact answer to here's exactly what's happening. I
Mm-hmm.
think what's presented or what should be presented is really here's some things that we're observing, and here could be some things that are happening in the underlying current, if you will, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore you should take some of these actions if you want to address that. Because quite honestly, if I have a measure, which in Crunchr I do, of what somebody's likeliness to leave is, and then also what kind of impact that's going to have. Are they a high producer, a low producer? Is it critical for me that that individual, stays for whatever period of time based on the work that we need to get done? Going back to that concept, well, then I can take a couple of different actions. I could do nothing. It's like, okay, well, if it happens, it happens, which, again, it's always a choice. Or I can choose to go wrap a big bear hug around that person and say, hey, let's get you some new opportunities. Let's enroll you in some, new certification or classes that you're going to need to get to your next level. And, conversely, I can also start planning for that person's replacement.
Mm-hmm.
Can I start knowledge sharing the work that that person's doing? So if they do leave, the blow is just less impactful, and I have more of a triage kind of issue or impact down the line. And I think that's really up to that individual leader based on what they're trying to do in the culture of their team.
Mm-hmm.
But you get options and you get the chance to kind of take some of that action. And it's no longer hey, I'm leaving. Oh my gosh, I had no idea. And I can't live without you. And, let me make you an aggressive counter offer, even though that's probably not going to work because you just, weren't happy, whatever. So hopefully that makes sense. But I don't think it's just never like, well, this person can do this because we know this about whatever's going on in their world.
Right. No, it makes perfect sense. And to your point, it takes an open-minded approach to listen, learn, consume the data, and again, to put my language over it, to be potentially wrong or be open to courses of action that might not have been visible beforehand. So,
Yeah.
but ultimately learning. So, workforce strategy. I know you want to talk about.
Well, no, and I guess it kind of leads into, some of the things that you might consider, which is in the past, I think we always thought of like career progression as a linear function. It's like, well, you start here and then you advance to this role, and then maybe one day you can reach, the end of that, career ladder, which looks like this, and that's kind of the carrot that you dangle in front of everybody. And I think what that data and insight gives you is, well, maybe we can look at a broader group of job families and how we might you know train somebody into that next level, but then also move them up and down the chain within that career ladder. So it's not always a advancement, sometimes it's a lateral position. This latest role that I took on myself was very much in that same vein. I'm getting to work more aggressively directly with our frontline businesses on different strategies, and that is exciting me because it's using the skills that I developed somewhere else in a new way and helping me see a more complete picture of what we do, so that when I'm ready to advance to another role, I'm far more prepared and I can speak to a broader perspective. And I think, whether it's in for this particular scenario, we're looking at cybersecurity, but I mean, it really could be in any function within an organization of how you think about that. And again, prior to having a bunch of insightful data for us to look at, we just looked at it as a very linear, and then that's how we organize our talent acquisition strategy and our learning and development. And now we've taken a much more agile approach because we can take those early initiatives, interventions, and nudges into our hands and have different options than just whatever's next on the list.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. And just to hone in on that term, agile is not only, correct me if I'm wrong, from an individual perspective on different options that one can take their career, but the organization can flex and move depending on evolving needs. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we have a workforce advisory, an advisory group, Celerity, that's under the Randstad umbrella, and they talk about the responsive enterprise, and really what that means is that you're not fixed into just one scenario, business plan, whatever the case might be, because around the next corner is a geopolitical issue that's going to disrupt a supply chain, or something that's happening within your customer environment. And so you always need to have that responsive enterprise mentality, and you might call that agile. But at the same time, it's really just having the mindset that it's not fixed and it will change, and probably more rapidly as we go into the future.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Absolutely agreed. So I know you got a few more slides for us.
Yeah, and I just wanted to comment a few things that what we really achieved with rolling Crunchr out as the internal platform for Randstad, and two things that stick out to me. One, we got more meaningful insights from our talent organization in real time, so able to exercise surveys and pulse outreach to our organization, and use that to help us contextualize what we might be seeing in terms of higher rates, turnover, productivity, et cetera. And then just creating that global consistency around what we call the different roles within our organization, and making sure that when we were comparing things across regions as we move into this new leadership structure, that we're not making any false assumptions because we didn't really have the taxonomy correctly. And I just can't stress enough how important that is, whether you use a tool like Crunchr or go through that data cleansing exercise on your own. Having that be the basis for where you go next will only benefit you, no matter what kind of data intelligence or analysis you're going to do. So was extremely happy with kind of where we went from our in-house strategy, and think that many organizations are continuing to build upon their own expertise in this area. So with that, again, just kind of as a recap for what we did with in-house, we also realized that there's a tremendous amount of data in the public square, if you will. I know most of this is going to refer to many digital platforms and areas of insight for us, but when we looked at those as a broad conglomeration of systems and data, and then also made sure that when we compared it to our internal data, we had a similar taxonomy and view on what those roles were, we gained tremendous insight from what the true benchmarks were for organizations, how we were going to evaluate things like supply and demand, how we're guiding customers on what roles we should think about as a forever remote workforce type of position versus where organizations should have either a hybrid or team that's going back to the offices. So those types of insights are incredibly powerful for us. And what we did, because we are the largest talent organization in the world, is we took all of our internal data and we anonymized that, so we didn't have any issues with GDPR or concerns with privacy. And then we started either acquiring or scraping public data from areas like BLS in the United States, or we partner with an organization called Burning Glass in terms of third-party data and systems. And we developed this platform called Randstad Market Insights, which we provide in our service to our customers. This is not a platform that we sell and or license. And really what we did is we took all of that data and visualized it in a way that it could be updated in real time. And we could take a couple of different looks at the market. So by role, what's the availability of talent? Who else is recruiting for those roles? What's the likelihood that role is going to be automated or impacted by automation in the near future? And then how do we start to look at the demographics around those positions based on gender, race, background, education, so we can give a better context to what's the future for that role look like, and if it's something that has a rather low penetration from a diversity perspective, how do we start to future plan for that in our build strategy so we can actually create more of that workforce with diverse backgrounds that we want to see. So this really helped us kind of use both our in-house data, but then look at all of that available information from the market to give us, again, kind of an insight of where are the gaps and where could we go in terms of that rent, borrow, buy, build strategy to fill in the gaps in the near term and long term.
Gosh. I just, yes, give me some of that. That's a whole nother conversation about how you use this, and you referred to it, but again, this can be a whole separate conversation, so I'm not inviting that we go into it now. But when we do talk about workforce planning, and you mentioned responsive organizations, what I call continuous work transformation is being open to the fact that, hey, if we are just hiring just because we believe we have a need and we're not aware of the supply demand relationship for those types of jobs in a particular geography at that point in time, then we're just kind of fishing in a lake that we're hoping fish are there. So to formulate a not only recruiting strategy but location strategy, with this data at this day and age is, correct me if I'm wrong, a must have. Yeah.
I think it's going to be. I think that organizations can still survive on, legacy approaches for a very, very short period of time. And again, I think a lot of organizations are struggling to say, how do we take that first step into, the data and analytics space and do it in the right way, do it in a compassionate way, in an empathetic way, and not use it as a tool for the drive for ultimate efficiency and productivity, and without the human element really taken into effect. But I think to again contextualize it, and I know the screen's moving, so I'm going to move out of it in a second. But if I'm looking for a biostatistician and the market is telling me, hey, here's where all the demands are today, here's where they were 18 months ago. Here's the top employers. Here's where that talent sits geographically. What I can start to actually decide upon is, okay, where does the current population sit in terms of the employers that they probably are working at? So if I'm recruiting from a competitor, well, what's my competitive advantage? Which then makes you ask the question of, well, what's my employee value proposition? And how do I market to that individual talent why they would want to leave that organization and come and work at an organization like mine? It helps you tailor down to that individual level of your recruiting effort versus, a very traditional job posting or agency model where you feel like it's kind of under your control, and hopefully, we spend enough money to recruit those people to be interested in coming to work at our organization. And it also helps you see whether or not you would want to reload somebody from another market, because if you see a tremendous population in maybe a lower cost of living environment, or a higher cost of living environment, and you've got an opportunity where they can work remotely or change without much impact to their life, you might think about just different ways that you access that talent instead of what's immediately available to you in your local strategy. And that is the same with our global strategy, which is you need to understand where the market is sitting today from an availability standpoint, because a lot of these roles and skills that are in such high demand today are not easily trainable. They're not growing on trees. And so if you want to build that is a long-term strategy. But if you want to find it today, you really have to go to where that talent is. And that might be outside of the country. It definitely might be outside of your local, market. And so at least having that intelligence and understanding what's available in the market will enable you to optimize the strategy that you've designed. And it's something that you should consistently revisit, because as we saw in the pandemic, people moved and things changed quite regularly. And And we're finding that people fixed in on a strategy, and then all of a sudden, there was a bunch of people that weren't available, and they didn't understand why. I often get asked the question of like, well, where did everybody go? And it's like, well, they went a bunch of different places, and they started doing a bunch of different things because all of a sudden they could. And that will happen for now and forever.
Yep. 100% agree. Well, thank you for sharing. And I know we're going to wrap up here shortly, but I want to, you're going to talk about human predictions, and I'm really interested in this topic for a host of reasons. But please.
Yeah. So last tool and kind of partnership that we've really made an investment in, human predictions was a technology platform that was started by a recruiting industry leader, Elliot Garms, and he had his own agency. And the starting premise for this was he was recruiting in the tech space, and he wanted to get better at identifying when different sets of individuals would be ready for having a conversation to start that next role. He didn't want to have it be something where he needed to reach out to thousands of people to get a 1% response rate or whatever the typical email open and response rate is, which is very low. He wanted to find people that were ready for those conversations. And what he realized was things like anniversary dates meant a lot. So when you're in the tech space and you're working for companies that have a vesting schedule, you'll typically see people become more open to opportunities after their second year. They vested, some sort of shares or equity into that company, and they might be looking for that next project. And then he used that and really expanded it by saying, okay, if I just don't look at LinkedIn in this one data point, but I collect all the data points around somebody's profile, which is usually pretty broad in terms of what's available out in the marketplace from GitHub, from Stack Overflow, from really unique communities like Ruby Gems, to understand, well, what projects have they worked on, and what papers have they written and gotten published, or what speaking engagements. I can now really relate to that talent in a different way, not just about, hey, here's a job I have open, but here's the things that we saw about you that really stood out. And we'd love to have a conversation with you about, the work that you're doing in XYZ space, or the paper that you published in predictive analytics, and really targeting what that person cares about versus what your need as an employer is. And again, the results really speak for themselves. And that's really just on the talent acquisition side. But I think the other thing that often escapes organizations, especially in the tech world, is that individuals are constantly upskilling themselves. So if you hire somebody to be a software engineer and you're having them work on, maybe some Java or, different projects, but in the background, they might be teaching themselves Docker or Python or, a bunch of different things that you had no idea, which you also need, but they're not updating your HRIS system with the skills that they've taught themselves or the projects they've worked on the side. So having the aspect of like, what are the hidden inventory of skills I already have? And how do I go to my own employees and say, hey, saw that you have this new skill, like we could use you on this other team, because otherwise they're going to find uses for those skills elsewhere.
Yeah. I absolutely love it. And not only capturing the intention overtly, but understanding the behavior that they're engaging in that reflects their intentions. And so, it's wonderful that we're understanding. And what I'll highlight is not only for the benefit of the organization, it's the benefit of the individual, him or herself, and having them be seen and presenting them with opportunities. So certainly want to learn more about it. But so thank you for sharing. As we start to wrap, Josh, any final comments, and how can people learn more about you and what you're doing there at Randstad?
Yeah, I'm not hard to find. So, probably the best way is to reach out to me on LinkedIn and send me a message, or, follow me, connect with me there. But I am going to be speaking at the Medical Products Outsourcing Conference in Austin in 2 weeks. And then I'll also be at the SIA Healthcare Conference in early November. So really interested to connect with anybody in this field. I think that it's something that as a community, we only grow stronger together, and really can shape the right way to use data and analytics for human just advancement in the workforce, and build the right type of companies that are really going to be making an impact.
Well, Josh, congratulations on what you've achieved. Thank you for sharing, as well as the human approach that you take. I mean, it's needed in the world today, and we need to evolve towards that. And balancing the demands of the business and the needs of the shareholders with being compassionate and empathetic to the people who are actually doing the work. So I want to highlight and celebrate that. So thank you again for sharing. Appreciate you.